Equity Mates.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome to another episode of Equity Mates, a podcast that follows our journey of investing. Whether you're an absolute beginner or approaching Warren Buffett status, our aim is to help break down your barriers from beginning to dividend. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How's it going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. We're back with our first industry deep dive of 2022, and we're talking about an industry that has a real place in your heart. Your black heart.
Not true, but it is an industry that it's a fascinating one, and it's going through a lot of change at the moment, which we're going to dive into, and that is the oil industry.
That's it.
Oil industry. A lot going on, but before we jump into that, just very briefly, we spoke about our community survey that is now live. It's an opportunity for you guys to give us direct feedback on how you think our content is going, everything Equity Mates Media related, and it gives us the chance to create better content for you guys going forward. So please, the link will be in the show notes. It'll also be on our Instagram bio. So make sure you go and fill that out. If you fill it out, all questions, it'll only take 15 minutes. You go in the running to win $500. So it would be greatly appreciated if you could spend that 15 minutes on your way to work or wherever it may be, filling in the survey. It does close, I think,
end of this month. Yeah. Do it while you're listening to this episode.
Yeah, well, don't do that because then you won't be concentrating.
The Equity Mates community can multitask. So yeah, if you could, that would be really helpful. It'll help us make better content, even if it's just to tell us what industry we should do a deep dive on next. Just tell us because we want to know, please.
That's it. So if you've been hanging out to give us feedback, now's your chance to do it.
Yeah, but let's get into this industry deep dive because this is one that's particularly relevant at the moment. A lot of people probably wouldn't think about investing in the oil industry. I definitely don't have any oil in my portfolio. I'm going to hazard a guess despite my joke.
I'm all oil.
Fair enough.
Oil only.
You've had a tough few years, but you're having a very good sort of 6 months.
I'm swimming in it at the moment.
But it's particularly relevant because of this conversation around inflation that we're all living through to kick off 2022. And it's also relevant because oil is an input into everything. Name me an industry that doesn't have oil or energy as an input, and I'll name you a software company.
What?
Well, I was thinking about but even they are sort of exposed to the oil industry. Not really as much, but...
Software.
Yeah. Like some of their equipment, they still need to get,
You reckon in every single industry, somewhere along the supply chain,
oil
would be involved?
Because if you're unless you're building something on a computer and you're shipping it via the internet, cloud software or something like that, you're exposed to oil even in the most basic form of transport.
Well, surely oil goes into producing a computer.
Well, yeah, that's why I was like, there still are, but it's, Yeah,
it's tenuous.
Yeah. It's pretty weak. But yeah, every industry is exposed to the cost of energy. And as much as the world is trying to transition away from the oil industry, oil is still the biggest form of energy. I was actually listening to something earlier today. 9% of cars sold in America now are electric, which I think is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Wait, it was either America or 9% of the world.
Big difference.
That's a big difference. Still, apparently
Either way.
In 2010, it was 0%.
That's good change.
So good change in a decade. Need a bigger change in the next decade. But what that means is that 91% of cars being sold today...
Oil.
Still oil.
Yeah.
Let alone every used car that's being resold. So oil plays an integral role in all of our lives. And it's probably time that we understand this industry a little bit more. But it's also really relevant because of all this conversation around climate change. What are these oil companies, how are they positioning themselves for the future? They're seeing record profits, which we'll get to in this episode. They're seeing the best profits they've seen in, 8 years for some companies. What are they doing? They have some of the best executives, best business people in the world running these companies. Are they investing in alternative forms of energy, low carbon, carbon capture? Are they doubling down to find more oil reserves? What are they doing with this cash? So that was a question that we wanted to know, and so we're going to answer that towards the end of this deep dive. But let's start with setting the scene. Where are we today, Bryce?
Where are we today? Well, speaking of profits, I'm pretty sure at the time of recording this, Santos just released their earnings, and it's a record cash flow and underlying earnings for them, one of the big oil players here in Australia. So I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the companies a bit later, but just thought I'd get that in there at the start. But where are we? We're about to see oil price back to over $100 a barrel, Ren. To put that into context, if you're like me and have been long oil and oil only since the day I was born, not true.
Yeah.
Very not true. It's been an incredibly cyclical journey with prices, I guess, on a bit of a roller coaster for a very long period of time.
Yeah, but I think the important thing to stress is that oil prices have cracked $100 a barrel 4 times in the last 150 years. In like the US Civil War, they got to like 120 a barrel. Would have been a good time to be investing in oil then. But then in the supply shocks of like the late 70s, early 80s, in the early 2000s, and then again around the early 2010s, you notice that that's accelerating?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting to see the concentration in the last 20 years, and now we're almost going to see it again.
Yeah, so, and it is just an incredibly volatile commodity. Do you remember 18 months ago, oil was negative $37 a barrel?
Yeah, you couldn't pay to get rid of it. You had to pay to get rid of it.
So if you had gone long oil in the depths of COVID, when oil traders were literally paying people to take oil contracts off their hands, you would have made a fair bit of money in the interim.
Yeah.
But before we get to why oil has spiked so much, let's just set the scene on the industry. Let's talk about how the price is set, how big it is, because some of the numbers are pretty staggering. So the oil industry is one of the largest sectors in the world, generating $3.3 trillion in revenue annually.
It's huge. Humans consume 97 million barrels of oil daily, and I think we had a bit of a game in the office when we were doing this, and that's just a staggering number.
Put it in context for me, Bryce. What's a barrel of oil?
A barrel of oil is equivalent to 42 gallons. If you're here in Australia and you're not sure how that converts to litres, so, it's about 15.5 billion litres per day.
Yeah, I think it's a bit less than 4 litres to a gallon.
Nice.
So yeah, the 15.4 billion litres a day.
Or 5.6 trillion litres of oil a year. And that's how much we consume. That's huge. Huge amount of oil. That's hard to conceptualize, to be honest. But look, as you said at the top, oil is a commodity, and the price is set purely by supply and demand. And we're going to get into the mechanics of that and who's controlling what a little bit later on. But it's supply and demand. And you may have heard on the news, it's reported quite often, Brent crude oil. That's one of the major global benchmarks that we look at when it comes to prices. And West Texas Intermediate is another one that you'll often hear. It's America's benchmark.
Yeah, so the Brent crude is sort of seen as the global benchmark. It's based on the oil fields in the North Sea.
Yeah.
West Texas Intermediate is used as America's benchmark. And then one that you don't really hear, but the third index, the Dubai Oman index, is used as the Gulf states benchmark into the Asia Pacific. But the three prices all move in concert. They'll never be the same.
Yeah.
Well, rarely will be the same. But they'll all sort of move directionally in the same way. But yeah, they're just based on different oil fields, different regions. So that's a bit of a primer on how big this industry is. $3.3 trillion in revenue annually off 5.6 trillion litres of oil consumed.
No wonder everyone wants to be in it.
Well, a lot of people haven't wanted to be in it for the last few years. It's been a very easy trade for active managers to get out of oil because they say, even if you said it was because of ESG, it's also just a terrible investment. Because oil prices were so low and they were losing money, all of that. The really interesting thing is, do any active managers cycle back into oil when they're seeing just like super normal profits?
I would have to call some and find out.
But anyway, let's talk about why they're seeing super normal profits. What's going on with oil prices at the moment?
So we've had COVID, and the demand side has kicked in faster than we anticipated. The recovery side, what I mean by that, people are coming back online, and what I mean by online, travel, they're back out and about, economy's picking up, we're seeing fast growth in the States, Australia, we're seeing economy picking up here. And of course, with all of that comes a greater demand for oil consumption, more people driving, more planes flying, more cargo being shipped, all that sort of stuff. So we spoke at the top that it's a demand and supply relationship. So the demand side is really picking up. So that's one reason. And Ren, do you want to touch on the supply side?
Yeah, so this, I think, a lot of this is a supply side story. This is where we get introduced to OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, 13 countries involved in this oil cartel. Do you want to name them?
Algeria, Angola, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela.
Yeah. Now, and then we get introduced to OPEC Plus, which is just the
more countries.
And so that's
well, what's the difference? How are the 13 countries the biggest producers, and then the
no. Like, let's put it this way: Russia creates drills more oil than Algeria.
Yeah, Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how'd they miss out on the top 13? I guess.
I don't know.
Russia.
I don't know. Well, no. When OPEC was created, it was the USSR.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's not get into
it's not a history lesson.
So there's 24 countries in OPEC Plus. The other 11: Russia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Brunei, Ecuador, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mexico, Oman, South Sudan, and Sudan. Now, when we think about oil and when we think about big oil, we think about the companies like Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell. Those oil majors, which we'll talk about in a little bit, control 6% of the oil and gas reserves. Whereas OPEC and other state-owned companies, so that includes the big ones, Venezuela's state-owned oil company and China's state-owned oil company, own 88% of the world's reserves. So when we talk about oil's the supply side, OPEC and some of these other sort of state-owned oil companies control the lion's share of...
Does that include Saudi Aramco?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're in OPEC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they control the lion's share of the supply of oil. And the important thing is that OPEC either have been unwilling or more likely unable to meet their production quotas. So we're seeing big shortfalls at the moment from OPEC Plus. They haven't been able to basically hit their production quotas, and some people cynically could say they want to drive the price up.
Yeah.
Which
they can definitely do it.
They've definitely done in the past. But apparently, I was just researching this to try and understand what the go is, and it's all a little bit opaque. But a lot of the JP Morgan analysts and stuff think that they actually just can't. They can't ramp up supply and production enough. But either way, there's a shortfall from OPEC.
Who sets the quotas?
OPEC.
Okay, well, why don't they just reduce the quotas?
Because they want that, like, there's so many...
Yeah, the dynamics of it.
But a big thing is they don't want prices to go too high, because if prices go too high, then American shale starts to become viable again. Yeah. And then that is increases supply. And yeah. So there's a lot of geopolitical factors at play here. They want to sort of keep a price at the level that they want to keep it at. But yeah, there's an OPEC shortfall. So for the purposes of this, demand has recovered faster than expected, and supply hasn't been able to increase as fast as required.
Yeah.
And when demand is high and supply can't keep up,
Price goes
what
crazy.
happens? Price goes up.
Price goes up. Another impact on price is geopolitical tensions. We're seeing, obviously, talks of Russia invading Ukraine, which will lead to pushing up prices. And this really encourages companies around the world to stockpile. If there's uncertainty, they're going to start buying more and more oil, and that really brings forward a lot of the purchasing that they would be doing. And so again, you're putting demand pressure on the supply of oil. So yeah, it's interesting to see what's going on there.
Yeah, and that's in particular with the Russia and Ukraine situation. If Russia got sanctioned, if they invaded Ukraine, and then Western businesses couldn't buy Russian oil, then again, that would drive the price up. So JP Morgan put out a prediction. They think oil could reach as high as $125 a barrel this year. Barron's reported that some analyst, I can't remember who, suggested that oil could go as high as $150 a barrel, which would be the highest price ever recorded.
Yeah.
Do you know what the highest price ever was?
I'm thinking just over 120, I think, from memory.
147 in 2008.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's the situation. Oil prices are high. They will probably go higher. It's a supply and demand game at the moment, but it's always important when we talk about these commodity prices, when we look at these commodity industries, the cure for high prices is high prices. And what do we mean by that? Well, on the supply side, as prices rise, more and more marginal projects will come online because they'll be viable. You know, there might be a US shale oil project that's only viable if oil reaches $120 a ton. But when it reaches $120 a ton, they start drilling there because it's profitable for them. So for any commodity business, as prices rise, more and more marginal projects become viable, and that increases supply. And then on the demand side, at some price point, we start to find demand destruction, where people, businesses, governments start to change their behavior because prices are too high. And that's as simple as Bryce walking to work rather than driving his car to work because petrol prices are too high, all the way to businesses stopping non-essential business travel because airline tickets are too high. So you start to see that demand destruction, which then levels off demand a little bit. So the cure for high prices is high prices. That's always the mantra to remember when we're talking about commodity businesses. And at some point that will happen here as well.
All right, Ren. Well, there are three key segments to the oil industry. There's the upstream, midstream, and downstream. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so upstream are the guys and girls, the companies, if you will, that actually explore for oil reserves and then extract it from the ground or from shale rock.
They're the ones getting their hands dirty.
Literally.
Yeah.
They're the ones with drills.
Yes.
Then midstream are those that transport the crude oil.
Yes,
so
less dirty.
Are less dirty, so they're pipelines, tankers, trucking. They get it from where it's extracted to where it's refined, which leads us to the downstream players, which are the refineries themselves. They take crude oil and turn it into everything that we love today.
Yes.
Petrol, diesel, jet fuel, kerosene, plastics, petrochemicals.
You name it.
You name it, they make it. There's oil in everything. And so when we think about the oil industry, we mainly think about the upstream players. So let's start there. There are three types of companies that you'll come across. International oil companies. So these are entirely investor owned. They're interested in increasing shareholder value. Most of them are listed. ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Chevron, you
big
name
dogs.
it.
You've seen them all.
You think about the companies that you think are evil. These are so they're international oil companies. Second one are national oil companies, and that's government-owned oil companies. They operate as extensions of the government or a government agency, usually provide fuel domestically at a discount, and they use their profits to financially support government programs, not necessarily market orientated, not necessarily shareholder value creation focused. We're talking here...
Country wealth creation.
Yeah, we're talking here China National Petroleum Corporation.
Biggest in the world, isn't it?
I think so,
Yeah.
but don't quote me on that.
I think it is.
Saudi Aramco, although they are listed, they're still government owned. And then Pemex in Mexico is another one. And then the third type of oil company that you'll come across is a national oil company with strategic and operational autonomy. So these guys function as corporations, but they're not purely shareholder value creation driven. They're still focused on national goals and supporting the country's government. And they often balance the desire for profit with national concerns. So Petrobras in Brazil, Statoil in Norway are a couple of examples given there.
So, Ren, in 2020, 5 countries accounted for over 50% of the world's total crude oil production. Who do you reckon is the largest?
Well, I know who the largest is, but it's surprising. Well, a lot of people would be surprised, I think. The US. Number one, 15%.
Coming in at 15%, we see a lot of the oil wealth over in the Arab Emirates and those sorts of countries, and they do account for it. But Russia comes in second at 13% of crude oil production. Saudi Arabia, 12%. Iraq, 6%. And Canada, which surprised me, at 5%.
Yeah, Canada's a fascinating one. They have a lot of... it's like oil in sand, in like tarry sand. And when we talk about marginal projects, like that's more expensive.
My goodness, just digging a hole in the ground.
And there was a lot of controversy. We're about to get to midstream about a big pipeline that ran from the oil sands in Canada all the way down to, I think, ports in like New Orleans in the Gulf that Obama, I think, stopped. And anyway, it was a big political thing. But yeah, Canada, massive oil producer. Canada and Australia are very similar. We are British colonies that are seen as pretty progressive and love dirty energy.
Digging stuff up. So we'll do a quick whip around the world. Middle East, the biggest company over there, Saudi Aramco. China has China National Petroleum Corporation. Russia, you most likely would have heard of Gazprom. And then America and Europe are home to the 7 super majors, as they call them, otherwise known as big oil.
Yeah, when you hear big oil, that is a term used for these. I've got a bone to pick with the oil industry. The different articles you read, they either talk about 7 super majors, 6 super majors, or 5 super majors. And it seems no one can agree if ConocoPhillips and NI should be counted as part of big oil or not. So sort it out. Other industries have sorted it out. In accounting, they've agreed on the big 4.
In Australia?
No, globally, isn't it?
Is it?
PwC, Deloitte, EY, KPMG.
Yeah.
In Australia, we've agreed on the big 4 banks. Macquarie's not saying make it the big 5. There's an agreed upon big 4 and we settle on that. The oil industry, it's confusing. But let's talk about the broadest definition of big oil.
Let's go the big 7.
Which is the big 7. So talk me through them.
BP, Britain. Heard of it. Massive. ExxonMobil, US. Chevron, US. Eni is in Italy. Shell is Britain. Total Energies is a French company, and then ConocoPhillips over in the US. So that's the big 7 super majors, and they control 6% of global oil and gas reserves, as we said at the top, while OPEC and the state-owned companies control 88%. So despite these companies being huge, some if not all publicly listed, in the grand scheme of things, they don't have a whole lot of control.
Yeah, and because of that, the Financial Times tried to get the news, they call them the new 7 sisters, but tried to get the new super majors going. I don't think it really took off, but the Financial Times, based on who actually controls the most oil, they think the super majors should be China National Petroleum Corporation, Gazprom, which is Russia, National Iranian Oil Company, Petrobras, which is Brazil, PDVSA, which is Venezuela, Petronas, which is Malaysia, and Saudi Aramco. So you can sort of see, again, it's just like the idea that we have that the big oil control this industry is a perception that we need to change. Because they're some of the biggest companies in the world, but they still pale in comparison to some of these state-owned enterprises.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, Ren, when we're thinking about these upstream companies, the oil producers and explorers, it's important to consider their revenue, and revenue is tied directly to the price of oil.
Yes, they sell based on the international price, and that becomes incredibly cyclical for all the reasons that we spoke about above. But yes, they are directly exposed to the price of oil. Their revenue is dependent on it.
So if you're in it, you're in for a roller coaster if the price of oil is going up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
So then we move to the midstream, and these are the oil transporters, the truckies, the boats, everything that moves from the oil producers through to the refineries.
Now, I've pulled out a few names.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me if you've heard any of them.
All right.
Enterprise Midstream.
No.
Kinder Morgan.
No.
Enbridge.
No.
TransCanada.
No.
Williams Companies.
No.
Plains All American.
No.
Energy Transfer Partners.
No.
Magellan Midstream.
Which Magellan?
I think my biggest takeaway from looking at these oil transporters is I just don't know any of them.
Yeah.
One of the biggest unlisted pipeline companies globally is Koch Industries.
Yep.
People have probably heard of the Koch brothers if they follow American politics as well. But this is...
K-O-C-H, not C-O-K-E.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, so this is an industry that I don't know a lot about. I'm not familiar with any of their companies, but I think the important thing here is revenue is driven by throughput. So in the same way that if you're in Australia, you think of mining services companies, they make their revenue from how much ore they service rather than the actual price per ton of the ore. That's the same here with oil transporters. Their revenue is driven by how much oil moves through their trucks or their pipelines, rather than what the price of that oil gets on the market. But they are indirectly exposed to the oil price because if oil prices are high, the upstream producers are going to try and get more out of the ground. If oil prices are low, they're going to try and get less out of the ground. So they're indirectly exposed, but their revenue is driven by throughput.
Pipelines are an interesting one. Very, very political over in Europe and Russia. Is that right? Or is that gas?
Natural gas, but incredibly. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany is a big reason why Germany was a pretty weak hand in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. Their energy security is tied
to Russia.
But also pipeline's massive political issue in the States. Obama stopped a couple of key ones, Keystone XL, you may have heard of. Then Trump basically greenlit all of them. Biden comes in, stops a bunch of them. Pipelines are incredibly controversial.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, well then let's move to the downstream, and they're the refineries. They're the ones taking on the oil and turning it into useful stuff. They remove impurities, converting it into, as we said at the top, gas, jet fuel, heating oil, asphalt, you name it, whatever oil goes into. All right, Ren, I'll play the game to you.
Okay.
Top five oil refineries in the world.
Yep.
Have you heard of them? Jamnagar Refinery, Reliance Industries Limited in India.
I have heard of Reliance Industries, biggest listed company in India.
Yes, massive.
I'm going to just front run you and say I won't have heard of any of the specific refineries.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry, does that ruin the game?
Yes.
All right, keep going.
They pump out 1.24 million barrels a day. Then we've got the Ulsan Refinery, a South Korean company, SK Energy, 1.12 million barrels a day.
Haven't heard of them.
Surprising. Then we've got Paraguana Refinery Complex, the Venezuelan company, PDVSA.
Yeah.
971k barrels. You've heard of them?
Oh, well, yeah, I have, because they're one of the major upstream producers that we were talking about earlier.
Yep. Then Yeosu Refinery, GS Caltex, which is owned by Chevron, South Korean company, 730k barrels a day.
I have heard of Chevron.
Yeah. Then the Onsan refinery, S Oil, another South Korean company pumping out 669,000 barrels a day.
Haven't heard of them, but I'm noticing an interesting trend here.
Yeah, and then ExxonMobil has one called Singapore Refinery in Singapore, and it does 605,000 barrels a day. It's interesting that South Korea are in there, but not part of... Oh, they're not producing, they're refining.
Yeah.
Strange.
So the big takeaways, you named 6 there.
Yeah.
3 in South Korea, 3 of the biggest in South Korea. Yep. But also 5 of the biggest in Asia. India, South Korea, Venezuela not, and then South Korea, Singapore.
So we dig it up in the Middle East and other parts of the world and ship it all the way through to Asia and South Korea to refine it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well,
what's going on over there that gives them the edge over
maybe close to China?
Yeah, I guess.
I mean,
they're all their biggest customer.
They would all have a lot of ports, like Singapore, South Korea. They've all got coastlines.
Why don't the producers also refine it? Just double down.
Maybe not the technology.
Can't be that hard. They've got the cash to figure it out. Anyway, we'll have to give Saudi Aramco a ring.
Maybe it's not worth it for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
I think the thing to say about downstream refineries is their revenue is driven by end markets. So, they're selling all the products that they create, kerosene, jet fuel, all that stuff to end markets. But they're obviously quite exposed to the oil price in terms of their costs. If they're buying it from upstream producers to then refine it, so their profitability is tied to the oil price.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a deep dive on the supply chain of the oil industry.
We should say we're Australian. There's Woodside and Santos. They're upstream producers. There's a couple of oil explorers. But when we're talking about a global industry, they're small.
Yeah, tiny. Sorry, guys. So let's have a quick look at how the industry is playing out today. We mentioned at the top, there's profits galore at the moment, obviously directly tied to the oil price. But then we'll turn our attention to the transition of some of these companies and how they're positioning themselves for the future, given what's going on in the climate space.
Yeah, so no surprise, we've said the oil price is high so many times in this episode that the most recent earnings season, so Q4 for 2021, we've seen massive profits. Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, and Total all returned to profitability and reported their biggest profits in 8 years. 8 years, 2014, last time oil was over $100 a barrel. But those 5 super majors, so you say here we're talking 5 super majors rather than 7, they posted a combined loss of $76 billion in 2020, and now they're all reporting record profits. So it just shows how cyclical the industry is. Shares in oil companies are up around 20% year to date across like the average across the board. But it's important to note that we could be reaching peak cycle. So in the same way that in 2014, profits peaked, the oil price peaked, and share prices peaked in a lot of cases, and then oil price came down, we could be reaching the peak cycle again. But right now, today, it's a good time to be in oil and gas. To give you an example, ExxonMobil, in 2020, they made a loss of $22.4 billion, and in 2021, they made a profit of $23 billion.
Imagine being the finance department.
It's a $45 billion turnaround in a year.
Trying to forecast that stuff.
Oh, well, you'd just be like, we're in the money.
You'd also just be like, yeah, anyway, crazy stuff.
Here's my quote of the day. I don't often do a quote of the day, but this was too good.
I don't think you've ever done one.
Okay, here's my quote of the 4.5 years we've been doing this podcast. BP's Chief Financial Officer, Murray Auchincloss, told investors on an earnings call, it's possible that we're getting more cash than we know what to do with.
Unbelievable.
Must be nice.
But also, come on, give it a crack. There must be stuff you can do with it. That's lazy.
Well, we will get to that because that's the question that we set out to answer at the top here. What are they doing with all these profits? And Murray is honestly overwhelmed by the amount of profits he's getting.
And the number one thing a CFO should be doing is allocating capital. And he's like, I don't know how to do that. So,
yeah, there's a whole other part of this conversation that we haven't put in this episode about how the UK government, where BP is based, want to do a one-off super profits tax because inflation is really biting. There's some really sad stats coming out of the UK while BP are like just sitting on piles of money, not knowing what to do with it. But anyway, there's too much content. There's always stuff you got to take out. So, on one hand, they're saying super profits. On the other hand, we all know what the future holds for big oil. There will always be demand for oil. That's an important thing to stress. The world's oil consumption isn't going to go to zero, even if we completely change our transport systems, including, if we can create hydrogen-powered planes and like all of that stuff. There will still be demand for oil in plastics and petrochemicals and a bunch of other stuff. There's inputs in so much in the economy, but demand is going to drop. The International Energy Agency expects demand will peak in 2025 and settle somewhere between 24 and 77 million barrels a day by 2050. Keep in mind that we're at about 97 million barrels a day today. So pretty wide range from the International Energy Agency. Reuters thinks demand will be about 40 to 64 million barrels per day by 2050. So again, probably around half of what we're consuming today. The US government's pretty bullish. The US Government Energy Information Agency put out a prediction that oil would remain the top source of energy in 2050 and that we'll be consuming more. Today, we consume about 97 million barrels a day. The US thinks we'll consume 120 million barrels a day by 2050.
Classic energy from the States.
Yeah. So predictions vary, but on the whole, we expect probably oil consumption to drop maybe half by 2050. And the pressure's on. The pressure is on for big oil to change. Last year, a Dutch court ordered Shell to cut carbon emissions by 45% by 2030. An activist investor group won 2 seats on ExxonMobil's board, and investors outvoted Chevron's management as shareholders around, I think it was around climate concerns. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of pressure on these companies. We sort of know what the writing on the wall is around the shift to electric vehicles and stuff like that. And these companies are seeing stupid amounts of profit at the moment. So the question is, how are they spending their big profits? Where are they investing for the future?
Well, BP don't know what they're doing, but let's have a look at other companies. The first thing you would probably want to do is repay some debt, and that's what they are doing. They're repaying debt that they accrued over COVID-19. Remember that in 2020, when oil dipped to its negative $37, these companies would have been in a world of hurt, probably would have had to have borrowed a lot of money. They're increasing their dividends. The Guardian said that $36.5 billion has been paid out over the first 9 months of 2021. And in other ways of returning share value back is buying back shares. The Guardian said $8 billion in buybacks over the first 9 months of 2021. ExxonMobil, for example, they had a profit of $23 billion in 2021, back from that loss of $22.4 billion in 2020, and they've raised their dividend and repurchased $10 billion in shares.
So they're returning capital to shareholders.
Yep.
What we're not seeing are 2 other things, which they could be doing with their cash.
Climate transition.
They could be, they could be investing in expanding oil production.
Yeah.
Or they could be investing in low carbon technologies, carbon capture technologies. But interestingly, we're not seeing either of those things. In 2014, you saw a lot of investment in new oil production. So you're not seeing that this time around, but you're not seeing the transition to low carbon stuff. So what you're actually seeing is a lot of the oil majors scale back their capital spend and their investments overall. ExxonMobil said they were looking to spend between $30 to $35 billion a year in 2019. They've scaled that back to 21 to 24 billion. Chevron said they were looking to spend 20 billion in 2019. Now they're looking to spend 15. You're seeing that sort of across the board. The Europeans are willing to spend more than the Americans, but I think it's just a really interesting dynamic that these companies are sort of returning money to shareholders, shrinking their share capital base, strengthening their balance sheet. So trying to make themselves really attractive investment options, but it feels like they're not really investing for their future.
Yeah.
But the one final thing to note is the divergence between the Europeans and the Americans, I think. Because while the Americans being ExxonMobil and Chevron, aren't... they're investing tiny amounts in some of this low-carbon technology. The Europeans are doing a little bit more. I think BP, the company that doesn't know what to do with all their money, is probably leading the way. So they've got plans to dedicate 40% of their budget to low-carbon investments by 2025. They want to ramp that up to 50% by 2030, and at that time they want to be earning between $9 and $10 billion a year from the low-carbon sector. So they're pretty bullish. They've committed to net zero by 2050. They're building a 250 megawatt solar farm in Spain. They've acquired a wind energy company, EOLFI. They've announced they're going to reduce their oil output by 40% by 2030, which is about 1 million barrels a day. So there's plans. There's plans in the works.
So, and there's another one in Europe, the French company Total. So they are putting $3.5 billion into renewables. Love to see it. In 2020, they won Europe's largest electric vehicle charge point contract in the Netherlands. Wow. And invested in both onshore and offshore wind. So they're really getting into the EV game there. Love to see it. Shell, they've committed to net zero by 2050. That's massive. They're probably just going to be buying bulk carbon credits, you would imagine. How will they otherwise achieve that?
Great question. Maybe we should get the Shell CEO on to do a retail earnings call and ask them. But I think, yeah, that's sort of, we set out to answer what are these companies doing with their super profits. The answer is shoring up their balance sheet, returning money to shareholders. The second question is, what are they doing in response to climate change? I think we can see the European companies, Total, BP, and Shell, are doing a little. The Americans, ExxonMobil, and Chevron are doing less.
Yeah.
I think overall, so the International Energy Agency have basically come out and said, come on, guys.
Yeah.
They've said that investment to date by oil and gas companies outside their core business areas of oil and gas is less than 1% of their total capital spend. And that's not going to cut
It's hard to convince companies that are seeing record profits and so much cash that they don't know what to do with to think beyond the oil, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they might argue that we think carbon capture technology is going to save us and oil output isn't going to drop.
Yeah.
Or that we're going to find a new way of refining it.
You guys have got it all wrong.
Drilling it, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's pretty interesting because me not being an oil and gas executive, but me just thinking about where the world is going. If I was a BP CFO with no idea how much money, no idea what to spend all my money on, I would probably be thinking about like what's the businesses that we can acquire that can get us into
acquisition,
a competitive space in the new energy sector, or like what can we build internally ourselves, or how do we leverage our gas pipelines to start moving hydrogen, and
similar to Fortescue here in Australia and their green fund.
Yeah, and I'm sure those conversations are happening in boardrooms. I guess we as public market investors looking from the outside in, and I guess the International Energy Agency as outside experts looking from the outside in, probably aren't seeing as much as we would want to see.
Yeah.
But if you're not worried about the sustainability concerns of big oil and all you care about is the profits, you're pretty happy at the moment.
Yeah.
You're happy with the dividends, you're happy with the buybacks, and you're happy with the
price
share
of oil,
price.
Yeah. How long will it last? Unknown.
Until OPEC
Until
can
OPEC,
sort their supply issues
Hit their
out.
quotas or decide to.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a great summation of the oil industry. We covered a lot of ground there, but no doubt that there is plenty going on, both from a geopolitical point of view, demand and supply. There's just so many interesting factors that go into the oil industry and plenty of ways to invest in it and get access, be it through the upstream, midstream, downstream players. It's fascinating. Such an integral part of our economy.
And if you don't want to pick a winner, there's stupid amounts of ETFs. I was going to put a section in here of the ETFs you could invest in, but there's too many.
It's too many.
Yeah.
Way too many.
There's ETFs of the oil companies. There's ETFs on the oil price. There's levered ETFs. There's inverse ETFs. So if you want to go...
I think that reminds me. I think at one point I did go like a triple
levered
ETF. Oil
ETF.
Yeah. I've definitely done that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the ticker code was. It was over in the States. It did pretty well, actually. But again, it goes up and then bang, straight back down. And so
it's very cyclical.
You just can't, it's so hard to know what to do. Anyway, Ren, that was a lot of fun. A great industry deep dive to kick off 2020. If you would like to know more about the macroeconomic environment beyond just oil, make sure you go and check out Comedian v Economist. They're another one of the shows in our network, hosted by brothers Thomas the Economist and Adam the Comedian. They unpack everything that you need to know that's going on in the macroeconomic landscape. So go and check that out. But Ren, it's been fun. If you would like to suggest an industry for us to dive into, hit us up at contact@equitymates.com, or we're on socials. You'll find us anywhere and you can hit us up there. We'll do our best to reply. But Ren, it's always great to chat stocks and industries, and it was a lot of fun. We'll pick it up next week.
Sounds good.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.